Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me in the ITV networks. Today we are here at the University of Pretoria, and I have with me a very special guest. Tshepo is a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Law at the University of Pretoria, and he is also a PhD candidate at Birkbeck, which is the University of London. He holds a master's degree in both law and sociology, and from 2011 he has been a permanent collaborator in a 5-year European Union project entitled ALICE, Strange Mirrors, Unsuspected Lesson, leading Europe to a new way of sharing the world under the coordination of Professor Boaventura de Souza Santos at the University of Coimbra. Tshepo is also currently the chairperson of Khulumani Support Group and is the co-editor of Socio-Economic Rights in South Africa, Symbol or Substance. And with that, I'd like to say good morning and thank you very much for being here, Tshepo, and making this time. I know when you're busy marking exams and you have a lot of work on your table.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So, you are involved in a lot of projects. Okay, so I would like to start with this notion of transitional justice and responsibility to victims, because you have written about that. For the purpose and the benefit of the viewers, just elaborate a little bit on what do you mean by transitional justice and responsibility to victims?
So transitional justice is a notion of what happens after conflict, or what happens when countries are democratizing. So we look at whether people should institute truth commissions or whether they should institute criminal prosecutions. That's always a debate. Do you go for justice or do you go for peace? And the idea being that after those processes, you transition to a new society, right? So in South Africa, as you know, in 1996, 19 years ago, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And this process is very significant because it birthed the new constitution, it birthed new norms and new laws for the new society, right? And also it said how we should move forward as a society. So this process is very, very significant for countries like ours that are coming from conflict. And the reason why I'm so involved with them, with this topic and analyzing it with Khulumani, but also in my scholarly work, is because it set new norms for society. And if it's done in the wrong way, it can actually be to the benefit of perpetrators, as happened in South Africa. Okay,
so basically you're saying that instead of coming out as a support for the victims, it's actually benefited the perpetrator.
In South Africa, absolutely. You'll remember in South Africa, there was a deal, right? During the negotiations, one of the sticking point was what should happen to army generals from apartheid. Should you prosecute them or should you give them amnesty? So the amnesty was agreed and it was inserted in the interim constitution, right? And then people suddenly thought, but what about the victims? So this was an afterthought. So we give amnesty to these guys, but what about the victims? And the deal was said that for victims, they will not prosecute the perpetrators, but they will get truth and reparations. So that was the deal. This one gets amnesties, this one gets truth and reparations. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was there for a short time, for 2 years, in a sense. 2 years looking for, over a period of from 1948. That's a long period.
It's a long period. It's a lot of criminal activity.
A lot of criminal activities, but also that is not the correct way to start, right? We can start in 1510, the first conflict between Europeans and Africans in South Africa, 1510. Or 1652 if you want to be generous, right?
Right.
So for the entire period, the Truth Commission found that only 1,900 perpetrators could get amnesty. So for the entire period, the Truth Commission says only 1,900 people are responsible for what happened during apartheid. No army generals, no presidents, no prime ministers, just foot soldiers.
Yeah, right? but the foot soldiers do the work of, or carry out commands that come from higher up, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. So the chain of command must go high, and we should say who commanded them, right? So, and we didn't do that in South Africa. President de Klerk got away with murder. President Botha got away with murder. All of them got away with murder. In fact, most of the people who submitted themselves for amnesty were from the ANC, not from the National Party or from the apartheid government, right? So perpetrators got away with murder, those who didn't come to the TRC. But even those who came to the TRC, they came, they gave their statement, and they got amnesty. They could go into the new society immediately as fresh people, right? Exonerated. But as far as the victims are concerned, only 16,000 victims were certified as victims of apartheid. Now, if you think about how long the conflict has been,
and in a population of 40 million,
and the population of South Africa, only 16,000 people, right? So a lot of people were excluded, but even those who got amnesty, only a small number of them got reparations. And the reparation that was said by President Thabo Mbeki was 30,000 for all the victims. 30,000, it doesn't matter whether your father was blown up with a bomb. It doesn't matter whether you suffered sexual assault. It doesn't matter whether your loved ones were disappeared. 30,000 across the board. That's little. That's little. So if you look at the two, what happened to the perpetrators and what happened to the victims, you see that the process was not to the benefit of victims. So there's still a lot of unfinished business. That's why we set up this organization, Khulumani Support Group.
Okay, so what is Khulumani Support Group?
So Khulumani is, it's an isiZulu word that means speak out, right? And it was started by victims in 1995. So this is our 20th anniversary. And in this past 20 years, our mission has been for victims to take charge of the process. Not for NGOs to talk for victims, not for academics to talk for victims, certainly not the state. So the idea was for victims to take charge of their transition from victimhood, if you want to call it that, to active citizenship. So Khulumani is a national social movement made up of about 100,000 members now, nationally, 100,000. Now, if you compare the numbers with the TRC,
16,000. Yeah.
And we focus on about 3 areas. The first area is a demand for reparation. Not 30,000, but a demand for proper reparation and redress. The second leg of our mandate is reconciliation, social reconciliation. You will know that there was never social reconciliation in South Africa. People talk as if the TRC was this space that created this possibility for reconciliation. It didn't. Perpetrators went there, they read what the lawyers had given them, no remorse, nothing, told the truth, connected the truth to a political motive, got amnesty. They didn't have to ask for forgiveness, they didn't have to atone. On the side of victims, they were re-traumatized when they go to the TRC.
Yeah, to listen to it happening all over again.
Without any reparations afterwards, without proper psychosocial services afterwards, right? So there was never reconciliation. So we are interested in how do you come up with proper reconciliation.
And the starting point of justice is first, of course, is to show remorse, isn't it?
That's right. And especially if we apply the African notion of forgiveness and harmonization, right? You must show forgiveness, not retribution. We're not interested in retributive justice.
But remorse.
But remorse, which will restore society, hence restorative justice. That's what Ubuntu mandates us to do, right? And then the last part of our mission is how victims can play a central role in redesigning this society. Because the model that we have now is that victims must be integrated in this messed up society, right? So it's a process of assimilation. We don't want integration, we want to redesign this society, right? So those are the 3 legs of our mandate.
So the first one you spoke about, you said that was about reparation. And how do you envision getting reparation? Is that about taking cases to court, defending positions, etc., or what is that?
I mean, that's a very good question, because it's a debate in South Africa. Not a debate, but the consensus that has been accepted is that reparations should be sought from the state, because the state succeeded the previous state, which is a weird notion, to say the least, that a quote-unquote liberation state or liberation movement must pay for the sins of the oppressors.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Like we paid the debt of the apartheid government.
Absolutely. So yes, of course, the state must play a central role in paying some individual community reparations, so individual and community reparations. But for us, there's also a second part of reparations where we demand reparations from beneficiaries of apartheid. You will know that in South Africa, beneficiaries were left out of the process. From 1994, they became new people, no longer settlers, but natives, right? Without doing anything.
So the privilege continues.
The privilege continues, but also not just the privilege. Perpetrators or beneficiaries of apartheid can come back today and set up NGOs on anti-apartheid, set up NGOs on reparations against the state, set up NGOs on human rights, and therefore benefit again as beneficiaries, right? So there must be a demand from beneficiaries, to pay reparations. And then the last point is, of course, that states and companies that benefited from apartheid must pay reparations. So in 2002, we went to court in New York, and we instituted a big case in 2002 in New York, where we are suing a number of multinational companies who sponsored apartheid, because you know that apartheid was declared a crime against humanity by the United Nations. Sanctions were imposed against South Africa, but these companies continued to do business with South Africa, therefore violating the sanctions, but also benefiting from a crime against humanity. So in 2002, we went to New York to sue these companies. And the case has been going on until today.
It's still going on?
Still going on. And it doesn't look good, but we are pursuing that angle still.
So the whole idea about Khulumani is about bringing a voice to the victim. So it's not speaking for or speaking about, but the speaking of the victim, isn't it?
The victims themselves speaking about. That's why this is a social movement. It is not an NGO, right? The highest decision-making board of Khulumani is our National Steering Committee, made up of representatives from different provinces. So myself as a chairperson of the board, I don't make decisions. I get my mandate from bottom up from the members.
So it's actually a participatory democracy
Absolutely.
In the real
so
sense.
People come and teach us about democracy. We say we're not interested. We know what is democracy within our organization, but also because members of Khulumani were centrally involved during the process of fighting against apartheid. So people cannot come now and say, let's give you workshops on democracy, on human rights. Right? Yeah, so it's a very participatory model where victims themselves take charge of their own transformation, of their own empowerment. It's not somebody else empowering victims, it's victims themselves empowering themselves.
But then that's about reaffirming yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, but we have to go to a break. When we come back, we'll talk a little further. We'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me on the ITV networks today with my very dynamic guest, Tshepo Madlingozi. And Tshepo is a senior lecturer at the University of Pretoria, and we're having a discussion today about South Africa, the way forward, and of course, but we have to retrospect in order to find a way forward. And Tshepo, you were speaking about Khulumani, what it's all about, and I picked up from what you've written also, that regarding the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, you write about social injustice that was produced by both apartheid and colonialism. But I know that there are very many agitators inside South Africa who will say, but why are you referring to colonialism? That happened a long time ago, but we should only look as far back as apartheid. So why do you feel it's necessary to look back further? And do you feel that the history begins only with apartheid, or is there much more?
No, I mean, history begins with the beginning of time, right? History doesn't begin in 1652, right? But in order for us to talk about transformation, justice, or social justice, we need to understand what was colonialism about, what was apartheid about. And in my understanding, or I argue, that colonialism and settler colonialism, remember, we had settler colonialism in South Africa, produced three things, or was about three things. The first one was the violent imposition of Western modernity. That's the first thing. And therefore the shattering of African modernities. The second part about settler colonialism is that it created hierarchical ontologies, meaning that some people were produced as non-human beings, some people were produced as human beings. So that's the second part. But the third part was that settler colonialism was about settlers coming to South Africa and creating a new home in South Africa. But in the same process, making South Africans who were here before, or not South Africans, people who were here before, exiles, strangers, pariahs in their own land, right? And therefore, I'm very careful that when we talk about transformation, the solution that we propose do not continue this exiling of South Africans, where South Africans find themselves strangers in their own land. And that continues today in South Africa because Western modernity is still very central in South Africa. Therefore, people think that they have to become almost Europeans in order to function in the new society. Therefore, I'm concerned that the proposal that we are putting forward, the right to the city, integration into new societies, they perpetuate the idea that South Africans or black people, in a broader sense, have to become almost like white people in order to function in this settler-created sovereignty, but also in this Western modernity.
So basically what you're saying is that the transformation is about integrating black people into existing structures without changing the structures, and that's
Absolutely.
what you want to challenge.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the radical proposal that people put forward also conform to this. They perpetuate assimilation. I can give you a number of examples. For example, when people talk about the right to the city, right? We say there that black people should have a home in the city. A city should be a space for justice and humaneness, right? But what it creates, it leaves intact the spatial geography of apartheid. That's number one. But number two, it accepts this settler-created, sovereignty, this nameless country called South Africa. This province of Europe continues, right? So even proposals that look radical, because of a failure to understand what colonialism was about, and apartheid, of course, is nothing but a continuation of colonialism. So we shouldn't see this as a disjuncture. It's a continuation, in a different sense. Therefore, we need to go back and understand what was the idea behind settler colonialism, and what did it produce.
So do you feel that in the way these settler geographies and apartheid geographies have been created, have exacerbated the kind of violence that we see in South Africa, yes, contributed to the violence, and then of course, related to what we're discussing at the moment, what is the campaign in South Africa, to 16 days of activism.
Yes.
Are these all interlinked? Is that why we see
Yes.
these manifestations of violence, which is portrayed as a barbaric attitude from the black people, and
Yes.
it's inherent in black people,
Yes.
but that there are other structures that have contributed to this?
Absolutely. Remember, apartheid, as I said, the second part of settler colonialism was creating the idea that some people are human beings, some people are not human beings. As part of that, people who are not human beings were put in a special place, a location, right? A location for non-beings, or a black reserve in the rural areas, right? And of course, in the ghettos of apartheid, or in the township as they are called today, people were packed on top of each other, right? And therefore, with that, you have a lot of social ills that get produced when people are, in the first place, in a space that they don't regard as a home because they were put there by force. They were put in spaces that did not have amenities, spaces that did not produce humane living. So a lot of social ills come with that. And you see the same thing everywhere in the world. You see it in the estates in London. You see it in the ghettos of the United States of America. You see it in the banlieues in France. And the same is true everywhere, right? So it's not about inherent brutality or barbaric behavior from black people. It's that people were pushed in spaces where they were produced as non-human beings, or what Fanon called the zones of non-human beings. And therefore, this produces this kind of social ills that we see today.
And so what are your comments on this campaign that we have in South Africa about 16 days of activism, and do you feel it's necessary?
Well, I know that people don't say we don't need a special campaign. I think we do need a special campaign. I think we need a constant reminder about the fact that South Africa is at war against women and children. If you look at the statistics, you will see that South Africa, the statistics of rape, sexual assault, and femicide, the killing of women, is sometimes higher than in other war-torn zones, war-torn countries, very high. So we are in a war against women. One of the things that I'm interested in looking is, if you look at transitional justice or Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the idea was to reconcile black people with white people. But there was never a gender reconciliation, right? Apartheid was also about patriarchal violence. That was part of apartheid. Therefore, there needed to be a very clear gender reconciliation, or the reconfiguring of society. Therefore, I think we need these kind of campaigns. Of course, there must be 365 days of it. But I think special campaigns help us to focus and to remind ourselves and to renew our efforts in campaigning for this.
Okay, so even if there is gender reconciliation, do you feel that this violence against women and children will continue for as long as even the economic conditions of African people and black people per se in South Africa does not improve.
No, absolutely. South Africa is still a country of two nations, as Thabo Mbeki once said, right? It's still a country made up, as I said, a zone of human beings and a zone of non-human beings, right? And we need to attend to that first. We need to attend to the idea that we have never reached true humanity, as Steve Biko called it. We've never become a humane society. Therefore, we can do workshops. You can, demonize black men. You can do campaigns. But unless you focus on the idea that black people are still dehumanized in South Africa, and therefore, people, it produces this kind of brutalities against women, against gays and lesbians, against non-nationals in South Africa, you will never go far. So I'm afraid that human rights solutions are very limited in coming up with solutions because they're very technical solutions. Section 9 says you shouldn't discriminate, therefore don't do that. Right?
Yeah.
But unless we attend not only to the social, cultural underpinnings of this violence, but also to the idea that South Africa is still a society that produces black men as non-human beings, will never go far.
So we're almost at the end, and I just want you to relate all this and bring it to what's happening in the United States. Of course, it started with the Black Lives Matter campaign, and Hatim Bazan just today uploaded a paper, and he calls it the death certificates in America, cause of death being black. So how would you like to comment on that?
No, I'm saying, I mean, it's very clear that the United States of America, also another nameless country like South Africa, this settler-created country called, it's the same as South Africa. For as long as you've got settlers who put themselves as human beings, other people will be produced as non-human beings. Therefore, the slogan, Black Lives Matter, makes sense at one level to say we are human beings too. You must respect that. But what it should not translate into is the idea that white people, please give us our humanity, right? Okay. It shouldn't be like
that. Fanan said, don't ask for it.
No, you don't ask for it. That's why the same campaign won't work in South Africa. In South Africa, it won't make sense to say Black Lives Matter. Matter to whom, right? You should say my life matter, and I'm going to assert my humanity. That's the first lesson that Frantz Fanon teaches us. You don't ask your humanity from the settlers or from the colonizers. You don't say my life matter. You assert your humanity. You delink from Western modernity. You delink from the society that dehumanizes you, and you assert humanity either by force or by other means. Therefore, I support the campaign, but it should not be a liberal integrationist campaign. Please, white people, accept us in our society. Our lives matter too. It shouldn't be about that.
I think the starting point would be that we first accept ourselves, isn't it, and understand and affirm our own worth.
Absolutely.
Before we start on that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're at the end of this one, but I'm going to take you to a second interview because we have so much more to talk about. But for now, thank you for sharing your thoughts and for clarifying the issue on the 16 days of activism. But when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about what you've written in terms of race and racism, especially in the university, and then relate that to other issues. But till we meet again, thanks Tshepo for being here today. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.